In the lowlands of rural Myanmar, where the Irrawaddy River curls like a serpent through rice paddies and sunburnt villages, there stands a forgotten pagoda, cracked, leaning, and slowly being swallowed by time. It is not marked on modern maps. No monks tend to its halls. No prayers rise from its courtyard. Yet every evening, as the sun begins to bleed into the horizon, its golden spire flickers with light, like the dying breath of something once divine. Locals call it Shwe Nyin Sen, which translates loosely to the Golden Whisper. No one remembers who gave it that name. No one dares approach after dusk. They say the light isn't fire, nor reflection, but something else, something that hums low in the belly, a glow that moves with rhythm, like breathing. Sometimes it pulses, other times it stutters, but it never fails, as if the pagoda remembers something the world has long forgotten and refuses to let go. The villagers from the nearby hamlet of Thun Pu Tau cross themselves and murmur blessings when they speak of it. The elder women wear strings of garlic in their hair when night falls, while children are warned never to whistle after sunset, or they'll hear you from underneath. No one says who they are, but the fear is real, raw, and generational. For decades, the pagoda has stood alone, not reclaimed, not revered, just watched from afar. Its steps are crumbling, half buried in wild grass. Vines crawl up its flaking stupas like fingers trying to pry it open. The golden paint has blistered away, yet somehow the very top still shines with eerie brightness when the sky turns red. People who pass by, traders, pilgrims, even lost tourists, often pause at a distance. There's something unnatural in the air near it, a silence too thick, a coldness too sudden. Birds do not land on it, dogs do not bark near it, and if you listen closely at dusk, just before the last light slips behind the trees, you might hear it. A faint, breathless murmur. Voices, high-pitched, soft, rhythmic, as if children are chanting beneath the stone, praying endlessly. When asked, the village headman, an old man with hollow eyes and a cigarette forever clenched in the side of his mouth, says only this: "We don't go there after dark. Not even the snakes do." Then he turns away. Conversation closed. But something changed last month. A foreigner, a young traveler from Mandalay, part-time blogger, part-time spiritual seeker, came into the village. His name was Kol Tain, and he was drawn by rumors. He had heard of a temple that glowed with no fire, where whispers came from the earth, a hidden place with no footprint online. To him, it was a perfect story. He arrived with a camera, a drone, and naive enthusiasm. He spoke to locals, offered generous tips, and even tried to joke with the old headman. None of them laughed. That evening, he walked toward the pagoda. They saw him cross the rice field. They saw him set up camp at the edge of the trees. They saw him light a single lantern. And then the sun dipped. The pagoda glowed, and the villagers closed their doors. The next morning, there was no sign of him. No tent, no footprints back. Only his camera, propped oddly on a stone, facing the pagoda's base. Inside the footage was just fog, an endless pulsing red fog, as if the camera lens couldn't focus. And under the static and glitching pixels, a sound, not loud, but rhythmic. Hundreds of voices, children, repeating a prayer in ancient Pali, faster and faster, until it cuts. No one has gone near the pagoda since, but the glow has grown stronger, And sometimes, when the wind is low and the mist is thick, the villagers say they hear a new voice in the choir, deeper, older, slightly out of sync, as if someone unfamiliar is learning the prayer, slowly, reluctantly, or maybe not reluctantly at all. It calls to those who listen, the old women say, clutching their rosaries. But if you answer, your voice is never yours again.
His name was Koh Tane, 28, half Burmese, half British, a digital nomad with a camera, a drone, and a hunger for the kind of content that got clicks, the unseen, the haunted, the holy. He wasn't chasing ghosts, he was chasing mystery. And the whispers about Shuang Yin Theme, the Golden Whisper Pagoda, hooked him instantly. There was no GPS location, no blog posts, just a scanned map from 1952 with a faint ink smudge near the name Than Phu Tao, and a comment on a Burmese folklore forum. My grandmother says the pagoda still breathes at night. That was all he needed. Koh Tane arrived in Than Phu Tao with a backpack and a GoPro strapped to his chest. He greeted the villagers with a grin that was too wide, too confident, a man who had never truly been warned. He bought cigarettes for the elders, sweets for the kids, and beer for the local fishermen who pointed vaguely in the direction of the glowing pagoda. But no one would walk him there, not even for money. One woman, perhaps the only person in the village who spoke passable English, touched his arm as he left the shop and whispered, "If you sleep close, you'll dream in Pali. But if you speak back, you won't wake up in your own body." He laughed. "That's gold," he said. "That's the hook for my intro." He jotted it down in his notebook. He didn't see how pale her face had gone. That evening, he set off down the narrow dirt path between the rice fields, recording his monologue under the golden light of a dying sun. "I'm Koh Tane, and today I'm going to camp beside a haunted pagoda that, according to locals, whispers at night. They say it breathes, that it prays, that those who listen too long vanish, so naturally I had to come." His drone caught wide, cinematic shots of the crumbling spire. The sun dipped below the horizon as the final drone footage showed the pagoda start to glow faintly at the base. Not like metal reflecting sunlight, but like a lantern turned on from within. Then the footage ended. His last known video was filmed just before midnight. The footage is grainy. He's in his tent, sipping from a thermos. His voice is calm, but slightly unnerved. "Okay, it's 11:48 p.m. I've been hearing something. Not animals, not wind. Like breathing. Low and slow. It's almost like a chant. Could be my imagination, but..." He pauses, looks off camera, then whispers, "Did you hear that?" There's silence. Then the faintest sound. Not one voice, but many. Children, repeating in rhythm. Itan Pi, Mayong, Bavantu. The same line over and over. The next frame glitches. The audio warps. The video cuts. That was the last anyone saw of him. The villagers found his camera 3 days later, propped on a jagged stone facing the pagoda's base. There were no signs of struggle, no footprints leading away, no broken branches. His drone and gear were gone, as if he packed up and walked into thin air. The strange thing, the camera was covered in dirt, not dust. moist, dark earth as if freshly dug. And inside the camera bag, tucked between wires and spare batteries, was a crumpled note in Koh Tane's handwriting. "I think they're praying for release, but no one is listening. I can't ignore them anymore." That same week, the monkless pagoda began to glow brighter. The light no longer flickered, it pulsed. And from within the chants, the villagers say they now hear something new. A lower voice, an accent, not quite like the others, not quite a child. The woman from the shop, the one who warned him, went to leave an offering by the tree line, a basket of rice and flowers. She never crossed the field, just placed it down and whispered a chant for protection. When she returned home, she found 3 words carved in her old wooden door, written in Old Pali. "He answered us." Since Koh Tane's disappearance, 3 more travelers have tried to reach the pagoda. 2 turned back after hearing the voices. The third, a university student, stayed past dusk, curious. He came back to his hostel in the middle of the night, shaken, silent. He didn't speak for 5 days. When he finally did, he whispered the same line over and over. "I wasn't supposed to answer." The villagers now say that the prayers are not random, that they build into something, a plea, a rhythm, a summons. They believe every person who answers, even with a whisper, becomes part of it. Their voice doesn't disappear. It gets woven in, like a thread into an endless tapestry, a choir that cannot stop, a prayer that no God has answered. "He didn't vanish," the old headman says now, finally speaking of Koh Tane. "He just finally believed them."
The first time Min and Theory heard the voices, they thought it was the wind. They were city people, used to traffic, neon signs, and the hum of electricity. They weren't supposed to be here. It was Theory's idea, a weekend away from Yangon, off the grid. She wanted something authentic, something spiritual. Min had just broken off a project, burnt out and irritated, but followed her anyway. He always followed her. They had rented a small scooter and stumbled upon the village of Tun Piu Tau by accident when the main road to Mount Popa washed out from early rains. The village was too quiet. The air was thick, but Theory loved the stillness. She took photos of the buffalo carts and the sunset over the fields. She didn't notice how everyone stopped talking when they passed. At dusk, they parked the scooter and wandered into a rice field to get a better shot of the fading light. That's when they saw it. A solitary pagoda rising from the flatlands, bathed in the soft, surreal light of golden hour. It looked like something from another time, cracked, leaning, yet alive. Theory gasped. "It's beautiful." Min frowned. "It's eerie." There were no birds, no dogs, not even the buzz of insects. Just the rustling of rice stalks and a distant breath of wind that smelled faintly metallic. They sat near the tree line and ate sticky rice and jackfruit from a leaf bundle and watched the pagoda begin to glow. Not bright, not artificial. It pulsed, almost like something alive was trapped beneath it, exhaling slowly. Then they heard it. Soft, almost imperceptible. A chorus of childlike voices rising from the earth beneath the pagoda. At first, it sounded like a lullaby, gentle, melodic, familiar. But then it repeated, again and again. The exact same rhythm, the exact same phrase. No change in tone, no variation. A loop. Men's skin prickled.
Theory stopped chewing. Are they playing a recording?" she asked. But there was no speaker, no electricity, no movement. Just earth, stone, and chanting. They tried to laugh it off. Theory whispered, "Maybe it's monks underground." Min replied, "Maybe it's buried speakers. Maybe it's just echo." But neither believed it. They packed up and left quickly, not running, but not strolling either. That night, back at their guest house, Min woke up choking. He rushed to the sink, hacking and gagging, and spat out something dark. At first, he thought it was blood, but when he turned on the light, it was dirt. Cold, wet earth, packed between his teeth, under his tongue, even under his fingernails. Theory sat up and screamed when she saw the inside of his mouth, covered in strange symbols, etched in black, not ink, not paint. Later, when the local clinic tried to photograph the markings, they were already fading. By dawn, they had vanished completely. But that wasn't the end. The next morning, they returned to the field. They didn't know why. They hadn't planned to. It was like something was pulling them back. And when they reached the edge of the pagoda again, not daring to cross into the courtyard, they saw something even stranger. Footprints. Small ones. Bare. Too small for any adult. Circling the pagoda in perfect rings, overlapping, looping. As if dozens of children had walked in the exact same path, over and over. But the field was undisturbed. No footprints came or went, only the circles. And in the center, lying just beneath the first step, was a small string of wooden prayer beads, broken, burnt at one end, and covered in the same script that had been on Min's tongue. Theory whispered, "We shouldn't be here." Min nodded slowly. Neither of them looked at the pagoda's door, because it was slightly ajar. Just a crack, enough to see that it was dark inside, and that someone, had been dragging their nails on the inside of the wood. 5 long, blackened scratches. Fresh. They turned and left. This time, they ran. That night, Min recorded himself sleeping, just to be safe. In the recording, he is still for hours. Then, at 3:17 a.m., he begins to whisper, over and over, "Sabe sata bhavantu sukhitata. Sabe sata bhavantu sukhitata. Sabe sata bhavantu sukhitata." It goes on for 47 minutes. The next morning, he remembers none of it. But Theory wakes to find her hands dirty, the bed sheets covered in dirt, their shoes dry, untouched, but their feet caked in mud, and in the bathroom mirror, traced lightly across her cheek, was a tiny handprint. They left the village that afternoon. They never spoke about it again, not even to each other. But a year later, when Theory got pregnant, she had a nightmare. She was giving birth on the stone floor of the pagoda. Dozens of children circled her, chanting. And when she screamed for help, her baby turned toward her and whispered, "Why did you hear us if you didn't want to answer?" On the far edge of Than Phu Tao, where the land turns from rice to rock and an ancient tamarind tree casts a permanent shadow, there sits a small hut, sunburnt, crooked, and half swallowed by thorn bush. No one lives nearby. No one dares to knock. The villagers call it U Thane's place, though no one knows his real name, or where he came from. Only that once, decades ago, he was the guardian of Shui Nyen Thane Pagoda, back when the chants were still silent and the stones still warmed from sun, not shadow. U Thane does not speak, not because he cannot, but because he chose never to speak again on a moonless night over 40 years ago. He was a young novice then, assigned to maintain the pagoda's outer grounds, sweeping fallen leaves, cleaning statues, lighting incense. He was there the night it changed. He is the only one who returned. Since then, he lives alone. No wife, no children, no lights, no mirrors, no prayers. The walls of his hut are smeared with dried mud, thick and crude, as though trying to mute sound itself. The windows are sealed with funeral cloths and frayed rope. The floorboards are buried beneath old burlap sacks and faded offerings. People say he sleeps sitting up, eyes half open, as if he's waiting for something to pull him under should he ever lie down. Every evening, precisely at dusk, he performs the same ritual. He takes a small clay bowl, fills it with water, and drops in a clump of soil. Then he wraps a single red thread around the rim of the bowl, tight, looping 3 times. He places it in the center of his front step and stares at it. He does not blink. He does not move. He just listens. No one knows what he hears. But some say they've seen the water ripple on windless nights and the red thread twitch like a heartbeat. The villagers avoid him not out of hatred, but reverence. They believe he holds something inside him, not a secret, but a burden, one that, if spoken aloud, might bring it all back. Min returned to see him, alone. Theory had refused. She hadn't slept since their trip. Her nightmares came nightly, always of footprints circling her bed, always of children praying in tongues she didn't understand. But Min couldn't let it go. There was something beneath the pagoda, something he felt breathing when he closed his eyes, and U Thane was the only one left who knew why. When Min approached the hut, he felt the air change, thicker, still, like the world was holding its breath. The closer he got, the more his ears began to ring, not loud, but constant, a subtle tone like the edge of a chant, but buried too deep to hear fully. He raised his hand to knock. He didn't need to. The door creaked open, just a sliver. And there, in the dim space beyond, sat a man who looked like stone. His hair was white and wild, his fingers blackened from ash or ink. His eyes, dull and wet, stared directly at Min, without blinking. Min stepped inside. He said his name, explained the voices, the dirt, the writing on his tongue, the footprints, the chant, the whisper at 3:17 a.m., the prayer he couldn't forget, even though he never meant to learn it. U Thane did not answer, did not move, did not flinch. Min grew desperate. He pulled out his phone, showed him the recording of himself sleep chanting. Still, U Thane was silent. Then Min whispered one last thing, a question. Did you hear them too? The children? Are they still there? For a moment, the room was utterly still. Then U Thane moved. He reached into the folds of his robe and slowly pulled out a small object wrapped in white cloth. He handed it to Min. It was a monk's prayer book. Small, old, tattered. But when Min opened it, he gasped. The pages weren't prayers. They were names. Hundreds of them, each written in Burmese script, each followed by a line in Pali. At the very bottom of the last page, a smear of ink and a note, scrawled in what looked like dried blood. Those who pray without permission pray forever. U Thane pointed at the book, then at his own mouth, then, slowly, deliberately, at the ground beneath them. He drew one finger across his throat, not as a threat, as a warning. Min's voice shook. They're trapped down there, aren't they? U Thane stared. Then, for the first time, he opened his mouth and let out a sound. Not a word, just a long, dry gasp, like air escaping from a tomb. Then, silence again. He would say no more. Min left the hut, shaken, but not with answers. Only more questions, more dread, and the certainty that something terrible had once happened beneath Xuan Yin Thane, something that still breathed, still remembered, and still waited. That night, back at the guest house, Min opened the prayer book again. He flipped through the names, and there, written in the margins of one page, almost too faded to see, was a name he recognized. Ko Tane. Beneath it, written in tiny script, answered once, now leads the chant. Min closed the book, but the chant didn't stop. In the silence of his room, just as the clock struck 3:17 a.m., it began again, not in his ears, inside his chest.
Min couldn't sleep. He hadn't really slept since they left the field, since the whispering began, since dirt found its way into his throat and names began appearing in his dreams, names he never knew, spoken in a language he never learned. But now he had the prayer book, and in its brittle pages there was something more than ink. There was intent, a pulse, as if the book was remembering him. All roads led back to the pagoda, not metaphorically, literally. Every question circled it like the rings of those barefoot footprints, and deep beneath it, something waited. Min knew now with bone-deep certainty that it wasn't just a haunted monument. It was a seal, and the thing it held back wasn't entirely silent anymore. He needed to know what happened, not what the villagers whispered, not what the blog comments speculated, but the truth. So he went back to the village, to the old temple library, boarded and termite-ridden, near collapse. There, he found one surviving scroll tucked behind a cracked Buddha statue. It was wrapped in palm leaf parchment, tied with a frayed crimson ribbon, and marked with 3 symbols in Old Pali. Translated roughly, "Beneath mercy, do not listen." The scroll was short, just a handful of lines, written in uneven strokes, not by a monk, but someone rushed, someone afraid. It told of a ritual performed during a famine, of a senior monk who had grown desperate, watching the village starve, the orphans grow thin, and the monastery turn silent. The gods, he believed, had grown deaf. And so he turned to a hidden teaching, a forbidden rite never meant to be used, a prayer that would pierce the veil between worlds and drag heaven's ear to earth. It required sacrifice, not of life, but of sound, voices freely given. They say he led the novice monks, the children,
deep beneath the pagoda into a sealed chamber carved from volcanic stone. There they chanted without food, without sleep, without end, for days, until their voices burned into the rock itself, until they became one voice. But heaven didn't answer. Something else did. What returned was not mercy. It was echo, endless, insatiable, and it demanded more. So they sealed the chamber with prayers, with blood, and with silence. Only one survived. Only one escaped. U Thin. Min stared at the scroll for hours. The handwriting faded, but one line at the end burned bright in his mind. Do not answer what was never meant to hear you. But it was too late for warnings, because Min had already heard it, and worse, he had spoken back. He made the decision before sunrise, packed a flashlight, a recorder, the prayer book, dressed in loose cotton like a novice, no shoes. He didn't tell theory, didn't leave a note. Somewhere deep inside, he knew this wasn't a journey people returned from. But he had to go, because if he didn't, the voices would follow him everywhere, and maybe more than just voices. He walked to the pagoda alone. The sun hadn't risen yet, but the sky was bruising into orange. The morning mist clung to his skin like breath. When he arrived, the door was open. Not ajar, not cracked, open wide, as if something inside had been expecting him. Inside, it was colder than outside, far colder than stone should be. The air didn't move. Dust floated unnaturally still, suspended like ash in a frozen fire. The statues of the Buddha along the walls were all tilted. Not broken, but each turned slightly, as if looking away from the center of the room. In that center, just before the altar, was a trapdoor. It hadn't been visible before, covered in stone dust and age. Now it was bare, exposed, waiting. Min hesitated, not out of fear, but out of reverence. He whispered a single line from the scroll. May all who enter be remembered, not returned. Then he pulled. The wood groaned, air escaped like a long-held breath, and the whispering began again. It wasn't coming from below. It was coming from inside him. Min descended. The staircase was steep, carved directly into rock. No railings, no lights. The deeper he went, the more the air thickened, humid but dry, like breathing through cloth soaked in prayer ash. The walls began to change. First stone, then soot, then hands. Dozens of child-sized handprints burned into the walls, reaching upward, fingertips fused together in supplication. And beneath each, a name, etched in Pali, faded but still there. He recognized some, names from the book, names from his dreams. At the bottom was the chamber. The ceiling was low, forcing him to crouch. The floor, earth, but polished smooth, as if worn down by knees and foreheads over generations. And at the center sat a circular altar, encircled by tiny cushions, perfectly spaced, each stained, each hollowed slightly as if something had sat and shifted there endlessly. And on each cushion, a set of prayer beads, burnt, broken, incomplete. The whispering was deafening now, not loud, but everywhere, in his bones, in the walls, in his eyes. It wasn't just prayer,
It was begging. He reached into his bag, pulled out the recorder, hit play. His own voice, recorded at 3:17 a.m. the night before, chanted with perfect precision. And as the recording played, the chamber responded. The walls trembled, the air tightened, and slowly, around the altar, the cushions began to fill, not with flesh, not with shadow, but with impressions. Figures of children made of ash began to sit in place, each turning slowly towards him, their mouths moving. No sound, just movement. Then one voice, a new one. Behind him, low, familiar. Now we are all here. Min turned, and standing at the entrance to the chamber was Ko Heten, or what it used to be. His eyes were empty, his mouth moved, but his chest didn't rise. And as he stepped forward, the children chanted in unison, "Answer us, lead us, speak for us." Min dropped the recorder, and, without meaning to, without choice, his mouth opened, and he began to chant. The chant didn't stop when Min left the chamber. It followed him, not through the air, but through his teeth. He didn't remember climbing the steps. He didn't remember walking out of the pagoda. All he remembered was waking up in his guest house bed, fully clothed, shoes still muddy, fingernails rimmed with ash, the prayer book clenched so tightly in his hand the leather cover had torn, and in his mouth, soil. Not on his tongue, under it, caked deep, packed dry, like something had grown there. He rushed to the mirror, retching, clawing at his throat. Brown sludge oozed between his molars. He choked, coughed, pulled something out, a fragment of bone, no longer than a fingernail. Etched with script, ancient, Pali, a single word, voice. He couldn't scream. His throat refused. His tongue was still. But his lips moved involuntarily. And from deep within, he whispered a single line. Sabe sata, bhavantu sukhitata. Again, and again, and again. For the next 3 days, Min barely slept. He stayed locked inside, no lights, no phone. His voice was no longer his. He tried to record himself again. This time, he didn't press play. He just let the camera roll. When he watched it back, he saw himself sitting still for hours, unmoving. But at 3:17 a.m., like before, his body stiffened, his eyes opened, and he began to speak, but not chant. He began to name, one by one. Dozens of names, children, voices, all spoken in a soft foreign accent. He didn't recognize any of them until one. The last name he said, Min Tet Ong. His own. Followed by, he answered, he stays. Then, silence. Min destroyed the recording, but it didn't matter, because the next night when he opened the prayer book again, his name was there, written at the bottom of the final page, fresh ink, still wet, and beside it, a phrase, he is now a conduit. He tried to leave the village, packed his things, booked a bus, but every time he stepped onto the road leading out, something went wrong.
The engine wouldn't start. The driver refused to take him. A tire burst. One time, a sudden rainstorm washed the path out entirely. The villagers stopped meeting his eyes. Even Theory, when she came to find him, couldn't seem to hear him clearly. He stood before her, spoke, pleaded, but to her, his mouth was moving without sound. When she tried to touch him, her hand flinched back. Cold, too cold. "What happened to you?" she whispered. But he couldn't answer. Not because he didn't want to, because he wasn't allowed to. The voices now echoed in his dreams and his waking hours alike. They didn't speak in sentences anymore, just in need. They wanted him near the pagoda. They wanted him to listen. They wanted him to open the chamber again, not to free them, not to pray, but to bring another voice down. Someone new, someone warm, someone willing. He fought it, locked himself inside, refused to eat, refused to chant, refused to think. But the soil kept coming, in his mouth, under his nails, between the creases of his eyelids. And every night, exactly at 3:17, he would stand, without choosing to, walk to the window, look toward the pagoda, and smile. One morning he woke up with something pressed to his chest, a bundle, wrapped in funeral cloth. Inside, a string of broken prayer beads, a child's sandal half buried in dry blood, and a torn scrap of white monk robe with his own name sewn into the hem. The transformation was almost complete. Not physical, not visible, but internal. His thoughts began to drift, blur. He'd start a sentence in his mind and finish it in a language he didn't know. He'd try to scream and find himself humming. He'd pick up a pen and wake up hours later with dozens of names written across the walls, none of which he remembered. And then, one night, he heard a new voice join the chorus. A girl, soft, familiar. "Min? I can't find you." It was Theory. She had gone to the pagoda, looking for answers. He hadn't told her to, not out loud, but he dreamed of her walking there again and again. And now she was really there. He felt joy, terror, regret, and something deeper. Hunger. Not his, theirs. And when the pagoda began to glow again that night, brighter than ever, he knew they were calling her now, through him, through the dirt in his mouth, through the name in the book, through the voice that was no longer his. He tried to run, but his feet turned on their own, toward the pagoda, toward the chamber, toward the prayer. He didn't feel human anymore. He was a path, a mouth, a vessel, and they were coming through.
Theory never intended to go back. She had buried it all, the dirt, the chanting, the nightmares, the handprint on her cheek. She and Min had made a pact. We won't speak of it again. But Min had broken that promise. He didn't need to say anything. His silence was louder than screams. And when he disappeared, not physically, but spiritually, she knew something had followed him home. or worse, something had never let him leave. The last time she saw him, he stood across the room with his mouth moving silently. She heard nothing, but her chest ached, as if every word he couldn't say was vibrating inside her ribs. She had to know. So on the 7th day, just before sunrise, she returned to the edge of the field, to the place they once sat and laughed and pretended the voices were tricks of the wind. This time, she went alone. The mist was heavier than before. It clung to her legs like wet silk. The trees were unnaturally still. She reached the field just as the first light split the sky, and there it was, the pagoda. Still cracked, still leaning, still glowing faintly from its base. But the glow was no longer golden. It was white, pale, almost moonlight, even though the moon had long since vanished. She took a slow step forward and stopped, because the ground beneath her shoe made a soft crunch. She looked down. Footprints, hundreds of them, tiny, barefoot, perfectly preserved in the dewy grass and soft dirt. They circled the pagoda not randomly, but in perfect concentric rings, like the echo of a ritual repeated again and again. But there were no prints leading into the circle, none leading out, only the rings, spinning inward, drawing her gaze toward the center of the steps. That's when she saw it. Lying on the lowest stone step was a stuffed toy, old, soaked, and half-torn. A faded rabbit. Its fabric was marked with ash, its eyes stitched shut, and around its neck, tied with red string, was a small slip of parchment. She knelt, hesitating, hands trembling. She untied the string and opened the paper. It was damp, smudged, but she could still read the words, not in Burmese, not in English, in Pali. He has given voice. We wait for yours. Phiri dropped the paper. She staggered back, but her eyes didn't leave the pagoda, because something was moving inside it, not walking, not crawling, shuffling, soft and rhythmic, like many bare feet dragging across stone. And then the chant began. At first, it sounded like distant rain, a whisper. Then layered, dozens of voices, children, and one other voice, older, slower, leading them. Her heart stopped because she recognized it. Min. She turned and ran, but the field seemed longer than before. The grass tangled at her feet. Her legs moved slower, as if something underneath the soil was holding her back. When she finally reached the edge, panting and dizzy, she looked down. Her feet, covered in dirt, but she'd worn shoes. She looked back. The footprints around the pagoda were no longer just small. There was a new trail now, larger, fresher, matching hers, circling once, as if something had been following her from the moment she entered. That night, she didn't sleep, not for fear, but because every time she closed her eyes, she heard Min's voice whispering from the base of her skull. Don't answer them. Please, don't answer. But another voice followed, sweeter, higher, childlike. We already heard you. At 3:17 a.m., her bedroom mirror fogged. Though there was no humidity, no shower, no breath, and written across it in a child's finger, one voice opens the gate, two voices keep it open. She ran to Min's old room. He was gone, but the floor was covered in dust. Footprints again, small, circular, looping endlessly, and in the center of the room, scrawled in dry ash, was a circle of names, all unfamiliar, except one, hers. Phiri. Outside in the garden, the wind stopped. The lights flickered. The pagoda, though miles away, pulsed in her chest. She felt it, not fear, not dread. Summoning, not from malice, not from hatred, but loneliness, the kind only children can feel, the kind that never grows up. She stood at the window, watched the moonless sky, and began to hum, softly, a melody she didn't know, but her lips did. And far, far off in the dark, the voices answered.
She was 10 when the chanting began. Her name then was May Thandar. Small, quiet, forgettable. One of 37 novice orphans living under the gilded roof of Shui Nin Tine Monastery, when its walls still echoed with laughter, not lament. The famine had not yet come in full, but the rice pots were thinner, the alms bowls lighter, and the older monks whispered behind the library walls. They said the world was turning away from them, that the heavens had grown silent, that even the gods had forgotten the children. May didn't care for gods. She cared about her best friend, Ko Lin, who shared his fruit with her, and about the old cat that slept beside the Buddha statue, and about the cracked stupa where she once swore she heard music inside the stone. But everything changed the night the abbot summoned them. Only the children. No elders, no novices older than 12. Just the youngest, the quietest, the most obedient. They stood in the courtyard under starlight, barefoot on cold tiles. The abbot smiled with red-stained teeth and soft, warm eyes. "Tonight," he said, "you will do something no child has ever done. You will speak directly to the heavens, and the gods will answer." May didn't understand, but Ko Lin squeezed her hand, so she stayed. They were led into the basement, a place no one ever entered. It was narrow, wet, filled with incense smoke and something bitter beneath it. The stairs spiraled down farther than she thought possible. At the bottom was a chamber. No candles, just stone walls carved with script that shimmered under their breath. Not light, not gold, but something alive. There were cushions, tiny ones, enough for each of them. The abbot told them to sit, to close their eyes, to breathe deeply, and then to repeat, "Sabe sata bhavantu sukhitata," over and over, softly at first, then louder, then in perfect unison. The abbot chanted with them for a while, then stopped and left. They chanted for hours. At first, it felt like prayer, then like a game, then like punishment. Some began to cry, others grew dizzy, but no one stopped because no one told them they could. Time bent strangely in the chamber. May didn't know if it was day or night. She only knew her voice hurt. Her throat cracked, but the words still came. At some point, she looked down, and her lips were no longer moving, but she could still hear her own voice, chanting, without her. Ko Lin tried to stand, to speak, but his mouth opened, and no sound came. Only dust, dark, wet dust. He fell to the ground, eyes wide, and smiled, not from joy, but from relief. That was when the floor shook, not violently, but as if something beneath it had exhaled, and in the walls the script began to shimmer brighter. The handprints pulsed, and from the ceiling dirt began to fall. The voices did not stop, even as the children collapsed, even as they trembled, even as they faded. May was the only one who ran. She crawled toward the exit, choking, blinded, hands slipping on stone slick with soil. The last thing she saw as she reached the staircase was Ko Lin sitting still on his cushion, mouth open, no breath, but still chanting. She climbed for what felt like hours. When she reached the upper floor, she was alone. No monks, no elders, no prayers, just silence. And then, the entire floor beneath her buckled. The stone split. The pagoda sunk a few inches into the earth. A cough from below, a whisper, then nothing. The chamber was sealed, without ceremony, without mourning. The elders pretended the children had gone to serve elsewhere. No one asked, no one answered, and the pagoda was left to die in place. May was adopted by a family far away. She never returned. She never spoke of it. Until now. She is 83. Her hands tremble. Her voice is thin. But her eyes still see that chamber when they close. And tonight she feels something in her bones. A tremor. A pull. The chant has started again. Not in her ears, but in the ground beneath her house. And she knows. Someone must have answered. And the monastery is breathing again. She reaches under her bed, pulls out a bundle wrapped in faded cloth. Inside, a broken sandal, a burned prayer bead, and a photo of 37 children in robes, all smiling, all gone, except her. She closes her eyes and begins to chant. Not for mercy, not for forgiveness, but for memory, because the world forgot them, and the dead do not like being forgotten.
At first, it was just a hum. Soft, harmless, like a lullaby echoing from somewhere behind her thoughts. She heard it brushing the edges of silence when the fan stopped spinning, when the fridge clicked off,
when the night paused to breathe. Sabe sata, bawantu sukitata. Over and over. Theory tried to ignore it, but it followed her. Through the clatter of spoons, through the rush of traffic, through the pages of her books, where letters began to shift, curve, reshape themselves into unfamiliar script. Even when she wasn't thinking of Min, even when she forced herself to forget the pagoda, even when she sat in bright cafes filled with people laughing and phones buzzing, it came. Always at 3:17. Not a sound, but a rhythm, a memory that didn't belong to her. Then came the dreams. In them, she was always a child, barefoot, wearing a white robe that didn't fit, standing on cold stones surrounded by others, children whose mouths moved in unison, eyes closed, hands pressed to knees. She never heard her own voice, only theirs. And one night, as she stood at the edge of their circle, one of them turned to her. A boy, dust-covered, eyes like ink, mouth hanging open. He whispered, though his lips never moved, "You already know the words." She woke up with her pillow soaked. In the mirror, her lips were cracked, as if she'd been whispering in her sleep for hours. There was dust in the corners of her mouth, and worse, under her tongue, a fragment of wood, worn smooth, blackened at the edge, etched with a single line she could not read, but instinctively understood. Do not finish what cannot end. Theory began to isolate herself, not from fear, but from shame. She couldn't trust her voice. Words came out strange, sometimes too fast, too soft, as if she was mouthing a prayer she didn't choose. She recorded herself. Playback revealed nothing audible, only faint static, and sometimes underneath, children laughing. One morning, her neighbor knocked, said he saw small footprints outside her door, said he heard voices at night, thought she was playing a recording. She denied it. But that evening, she left flour on her front step, just to be sure. By dawn, it was covered. Dozens of tiny prints, each circling her door, perfect, clean, endless. But none went in or out. Something wasn't trying to enter her home. It was already inside. She started coughing, hard, until she spat ink, thick, black, streaked with threads of gold. At the hospital, tests showed nothing. No infection, no toxins, no explanation. The doctor asked if she'd traveled recently, if she'd visited temples, if she'd undergone any spiritual exposure. She lied. That night, her voice gave out, not from sickness, but from exhaustion. It had been praying without her, and now it demanded her silence. When she awoke the next morning, she found writing on her bedroom wall. Not ink, not marker, but scratched into the plaster. Row after row, one line repeated endlessly. The gods did not answer, but we did. Then the dreams returned, more vivid, more detailed. She wasn't just witnessing Erimingwer.
She was inside the chamber, sitting on a cushion, legs folded, hands still. Her voice perfectly aligned with the children around her. And when she tried to stop, to scream, she found she couldn't remember how. Her tongue knew only one shape, one sentence, one rhythm, over and over. The dream always ended the same way, with a voice behind her, deeper, older, tired. She turned and saw Min, but his mouth wasn't his anymore. It was cracked at the corners, stitched with red thread, and yet still moving. She woke up in the stairwell of her apartment, barefoot, dust-covered, and humming. There was no more denial. Theory understood what was happening. The prayer was not just a curse, it was a structure, a cage, a song written in bone and echo. And once you answered, even once, it didn't want to let you go. Because every voice added strength, every repetition made the chamber stronger. And now, it needed her. She tried to resist, taped her mouth shut, wore headphones to sleep, chanted other prayers, lit candles, burned sage, smashed the mirror. None of it mattered. The voices didn't need a mouth anymore. They had her breath, her heartbeat, her memory. And one night, just before the clock struck 3:17, she felt a breath, not hers, leave her body, and a whisper formed in the dark. One voice brings the echo, but two make it eternal. She understood then. She wasn't the victim. She was the completion. Min had started the prayer. She would end it. And then, it would never end.
Theory didn't expect anyone to answer the door. The house looked abandoned. Dust-coated windows, a tin roof curled by heat. No plants, no dogs, just silence, the kind that holds its breath. She found the address in a faded temple registry. One line, May Thandar, relocated Mandalay outskirts. No one at the monastery would speak her name. Not aloud, but Theory had heard it. In dreams, in chants, in the tiny breath between syllables the voices never quite finished. She knocked once. No response. Then twice. Still nothing. She was about to turn away when the door creaked, and the smell hit her. Not rot, not mold, but ashes and jasmine, the scent of offerings long forgotten. Inside, standing barefoot in the dim light, was a woman who looked carved from memory. Thin, bent, hair long and silver, eyes sharp as glass. She looked directly at Theory and spoke before Theory could say a word. "You heard them, didn't you?" Theory's knees nearly buckled. "Yes," she whispered. "They won't stop." The old woman nodded once, stepped aside. No invitation, no smile, just understanding. The kind that comes from surviving what should never have been. Inside the house was more shrine than home. No furniture except a mat and a low table. Walls covered in prayer flags, faded, torn, soot-stained. Bundles of herbs tied to the ceiling with red thread. In the corner, a small clay altar burned with black incense.
but it was the center of the floor that drew Theory's gaze. A circle of sand, drawn perfectly, untouched by foot or broom. Inside it, 37 stones, each painted with a symbol, each surrounded by tiny prayer beads, all arranged like a memory trying not to dissolve. May sat cross-legged beside it, motioned for Theory to sit opposite. She obeyed. "They're louder now," May said, voice dry but clear, "because the echo has returned to its origin." Theory stared at her. "What are they? Spirits?" May shook her head. "Not ghosts, not demons, not gods. They are unfinished." The words struck like thunder in Theory's chest. Unfinished? May reached for a bowl beside her and lifted out a single grain of black rice, held it between two fingers. When a child prays with faith, it rises. But when a child prays out of fear, it sinks. They sank. She told Theory the rest, the parts history erased, the ritual no one dared write down. The monks believed they were building a staircase to heaven through voices, but what they built was a well, and at the bottom were 37 children who never stopped praying, not because they were pious, but because their words had nowhere else to go. The chamber devoured them, and then it memorized them. And now it waits for mouths, new mouths, to wear the chant again. Theory was crying now. "What do they want from me?" May looked at her for a long moment. "Not you, your voice." Theory choked. "Can I stop it?" A pause, then softly, "No." Theory's heart dropped, but May wasn't finished. "You can't stop the prayer, but you can finish it." That word again, finish. Theory wiped her face. "How?" May leaned forward. Her hands trembled as she reached into the circle and removed a single bead from a tiny, child-sized bracelet. Each voice is a note, each repetition a thread. The chant is not a curse, it is a call. But no one ever stayed long enough to answer it completely. Until now. She placed the bead in Theory's palm. It was warm, too warm, and heavy, like memory. May said, "You must go back." Theory's breath caught. "To the pagoda?" May shook her head. "No, beneath it. To the chamber." Theory backed away. Her body rebelled, her lungs constricted, but deep inside, her soul agreed. It knew. This wasn't about escape. This was about completion. May pressed the bead deeper into her hand. "Sit among them. Let them finish the final line. Speak it with them once, fully, no fear. Then leave nothing behind. Not your name, not your echo, not your brief." Theory stared at the old woman. Her mind wanted to scream, but her body was already rising, and in her palm the bead pulsed softly, like a heartbeat not her own. As she turned to leave, May spoke one last time, voice cracking like a dry leaf. "And if they ask you to stay, tell them this: the one who remembers you is still alive." Theory didn't look back. She couldn't, because the circle of stones on the floor behind her had grown to 38.
The pagoda was waiting. It didn't glow this time. Not gold, not white, not red. It simply stood,
silent and heavy, like a mouth about to close. The field surrounding it was still. No mist, no birds, no wind. Even the footprints were gone. The ground was flat, untouched, as if the earth itself had stopped recording. Theory crossed the threshold without fear. It wasn't courage, it was certainty. She no longer trembled. The voices no longer whispered. They simply watched, from within, from below. Inside the pagoda, the air was dense. Not hot, not cold, but full. Each breath felt like swallowing memory, as if dust had grown teeth, as if silence had begun to pulse. She stepped toward the altar, and there it was, the trapdoor. No longer hidden, no longer sealed, open, dark, inviting. She took the first step down, then the second. Each stone was colder than the last. Each one remembered her feet. The prayer bead in her hand throbbed gently, in sync with the steps. And the deeper she went, the more she forgot. Her name, her grief, even her face blurred in the reflection of her thoughts. She became a vessel, not empty, just ready. At the bottom, the air stopped, literally. There was no breath left to draw, but her body kept moving. The chamber welcomed her like a womb of stone. No torches, no echoes, only stillness, so deep it bordered on pressure. And yet, in the center, they sat. 37 figures, children, or the shape of children, made of ash, bone, silence. Mouths moving, but no sound, until she stepped into the circle. Then, the chant resumed. Not loud, not desperate, but perfect, in rhythm, in tone, in grief. And she remembered it, every word, every breath, every pause between syllables, as if it had been planted inside her since birth. She sat. The cushion was still warm, her knees folded like they had done this before. Her hands rested in her lap, and her mouth moved. Sabe sata bhavantu sukhitata. And as she joined them, they turned to her, one by one. Not hostile, not hungry, but grateful, familiar, as if she'd come back to finish something she herself had started lifetimes ago. The walls shifted, not physically, but in memory. They brightened, not with light, but with names, hundreds, etched in golden script, unfading. Min's name among them, her name beside his, and below both, a blank space, waiting. Then the older voice spoke, not from a body, from the chamber itself. One completes the call, two carry it into silence. And just like that, theory understood. This wasn't about sacrifice, not possession, not even punishment. The prayer had never been heard because it had never been finished. It wasn't cursed, it was interrupted. And those voices, they weren't trapped. They were holding it open, waiting for the final voice, hers. She took the bead in her hand, raised it to her lips, whispered the last line. Not written in any scroll, not taught in any temple, just remembered. Yata pibuto, yata pinibuto. As things are, as they must return. The air inhaled. For the first time, it breathed. And the children smiled. One by one, their forms crumbled, not in agony, but in release, ash rising like incense. The chant slowed, softened, until only Thiri's voice remained. Then, silence. True silence. Not the absence of sound, but the presence of stillness. Whole, peaceful, final. The walls dimmed, the script faded, and the chamber exhaled. Thiri opened her eyes. The altar was empty, the cushions gone. Her hand still held the prayer bead, but now it was whole, unburned, clean. And in the center of the floor, where ash once sat, a lotus, growing, alive. She stood, climbed the steps, entered the pagoda once more. Above, the sun had returned. The world felt lighter, not cleansed, but balanced. As she crossed the field back to the village, a child ran past her, laughing, barefoot. She turned. No footprints. She smiled. That night, for the first time in months, she slept. No whispers, no dust, only a single voice, her own, breathing peace into the dark. The prayer is done.
For the first time in weeks, Thiri woke to birdsong. Not chanting, not breathless whispers, just the simple, fluttering rhythm of life. The world had returned to itself, but she had not. She lay still, unsure of where her body ended and the air began. There was a strange weightlessness to her chest, like something had been carved out of it in the night. Not violently, gently, like removing a thorn that had been buried for so long she'd forgotten how it hurt. She sat up. The sun was rising. Not bleeding, not flickering, not bending reality, just rising. Its light touched her fingers like it had missed them. And outside, the world moved again. Children playing, vendors calling, time flowing. No voices from the ground, no phantom footprints, no cold spots clinging to her shadow. And yet, there was something. Not a sound, not a shape, a presence. Subtle, patient, watching, not from malice, but memory. Like an old song that knew when not to play. She reached for the prayer bead still resting on her nightstand. Unburnt, smooth, whole. But when she picked it up, her fingers tingled, not with fear, with recognition. It no longer pulsed, but it remembered her touch. She dressed simply, white cotton, no jewelry, her feet bare. And for the first time, she walked not as someone haunted, but as someone carrying silence with reverence. The village received her gently. Some stared, some bowed, some simply stepped aside, as if they knew what she had done. She didn't speak of it. She didn't need to. Those who lived near the pagoda had felt the shift, in the soil, in the wind, in the sleep that came easier now. They didn't ask questions, only left offerings of flowers near the tree line that once no one dared cross. But one thing still lingered, one name, Min. She visited his old guest house. The room was undisturbed,
clean, airless. The prayer book was gone, but on the wall, someone had drawn a circle in charcoal. Not wide, not crude, deliberate. Inside it, one word: listened. She stared at it for a long time, then whispered, not to summon, but to honor. I heard you. That night the wind returned, not the chill that bites, but the kind that breathes. She opened her window, and for a moment, just as the clock hit 3:17 a.m., she felt him. Not in voice, not in body, but in absence, the kind of absence that speaks. He was gone, but not lost, not swallowed, not twisted, not trapped. He had stayed just long enough to finish the song, and now he was part of the stillness. Not a ghost, not an echo, a quiet space in the world that would never again be empty. The next morning she returned to May Thandar's house, but it was empty. No shrine, no altar, no prayer circle, only a note carved into the wooden doorframe. I remembered them, so they let me go. She smiled and wept. Over the following days, she began walking again, through villages, into monasteries, to forgotten temples whispered about by name, but never in stories. She didn't chant, she didn't preach, she simply sat, listened, waited, and sometimes, when no one else was near, she would whisper a single line, not out loud, but with her presence. Not all silence is empty. Some of it is sacred. Weeks passed, then months. She lived in simplicity, with less fear, less weight, but not less memory. She never saw the pagoda again. It no longer needed to glow. It had already been heard. But sometimes, only sometimes, when she walks barefoot across earth, warmed by sun, she feels the tiniest tremor, like laughter, like joy. And in those moments, she knows the choir is gone, but the silence they left behind is singing.
It began with a thread. She didn't notice it at first. Thin, crimson, tied around her left wrist, just above the pulse. At first, she assumed it was from May Thandar, a blessing, a charm, a gesture of closure. But she couldn't remember it being placed there, couldn't recall tying it herself, couldn't untie it either. The knot was too tight, too clean, too deliberate. She tried scissors. The blade slid through fabric, but left the thread untouched. She tried fire. It burned her skin before it touched the knot. She tried forgetting it, but the more she ignored it, the more it pulsed. Not pain, not warmth, a beat, a drum beneath the skin, soft, predictable, like the rhythm of prayer, the kind whispered at the edge of waking. She thought it was nothing, a souvenir, a spiritual fingerprint, until she found the child. It was dusk. She was walking through a nearby village, delivering herbs and food to a retired nun. She passed an alley, narrow and darkened by a low-hanging tarp. And there, crouched in the shadows, was a boy. Small, barefoot, dust-covered. He wasn't crying. He wasn't scared. He was smiling. And around his wrist, a red thread, tied exactly like hers. She stepped forward. He turned his head. His eyes were black, not with malice,
but with depth, a kind of remembering. Then, in a voice not quite his own, "You brought the silence with you." She froze. Her mouth opened. No sound came. He tilted his head. "You gave us peace, but someone still has to carry the stillness." Then he reached out. His fingers brushed hers, and her thread glowed. For the briefest moment, it shimmered, not with light, but with motion, like something inside it was waking up. The boy blinked, and when he opened his eyes again, they were just eyes, brown, confused, human. "Where am I?" he whispered. She dropped to her knees, held him, felt his heartbeat. It was fast, but real. He didn't remember anything, not his name, not where he came from, just the echo of a melody that made his chest tighten when he tried to hum it. That night she took him in, gave him rice, a blanket, a place to rest. And as he slept, she sat by the window, watching her wrist. The thread no longer pulsed, but it no longer felt hers. In the weeks that followed, the boy stayed. He was gentle, bright, drawn to temples, repelled by chanting. Sometimes she caught him standing still, as if listening to something only he could hear. When she asked him what it was, he'd just say, "It's quiet, but not empty." And then, one night, as she tucked him in, he looked at her wrist, then at his own, and whispered, "Do you think the silence ever misses us?" She didn't answer, just held his hand, because she knew the prayer was over, but its shape remained, woven in thread, carried in skin, passed like breath. Not a curse, not a haunting, a lineage. Some voices shout, others sing, but the most powerful prayers are the ones that never need to be spoken again.
It started with the wind again, not cold, not sharp, but uncertain, as if it was looking for something or someone. The boy, the one Theory had found in the alley, began waking up with dirt under his fingernails. At first, she thought he'd been playing outside, digging, perhaps, dream-walking. But when she checked the garden, untouched, no footprints, no overturned soil, no sign of movement, only dust, laid evenly, as if nothing had ever lived there. Then the whisper came back. Not many voices, just one. It didn't come at 3:17. It came at midnight sharp, every night. Soft, steady, always the same words. "You forgot me." It wasn't angry, it wasn't accusing, but it was breaking. A voice not raised, not remembered, a voice that had never spoken at all. Theory tried to ignore it, but it began to bleed into her thoughts, into mirrors, into the gaps between breaths. And one morning, she woke to find her red thread fraying, one thin strand unraveling, coiling on her wrist like a worm of memory. The boy began to draw,
pages filled with a single figure, a child sitting in the corner of a stone room, eyes wide, mouth closed, surrounded by 37 others, all with mouths open, faces blurred by motion. But this one, still, frozen, left out. Theory asked him who it was. He didn't know. But when she looked into his eyes, she saw something she hadn't seen since the chamber. Waiting. Not to be freed, not to be remembered, just to be acknowledged. That night, she returned to the pagoda for the last time. It was still, empty, no glow, the trapdoor sealed, but she didn't need to go down, because the presence was no longer beneath, it was beside her, a few feet away. She turned and saw him. The child was small, silent, frail, eyes dark but not soulless, hands clenched, feet bare, red thread wound around both ankles like shackles. He didn't speak. He only looked at her and waited. Then Theory understood. He hadn't been forgotten by the world. He hadn't even been forgotten by the monks. He had been forgotten by the ritual itself. Too shy, too afraid, too silent. And because he never spoke, his voice was never absorbed, never echoed, never ended. So while the 37 became a prayer, he became the pause between them, the missing beat, the gap in the rhythm, the silence the chamber never knew what to do with. So it left him behind, not alive, not dead, not spirit, not sound, just waiting. Theory knelt, didn't speak. She knew better now. Instead, she reached into her pocket, pulled out the broken thread from her wrist, and tied it around his. For a moment, nothing changed. Then his shoulders shook, his lips trembled, and finally, a whisper, so quiet it almost broke the air. "May I begin now?" She nodded, eyes full, and together they spoke. Sabe sata bhavantu sukhitata. Just once, just one line, no chant, no ritual, no echo, just one voice finally joining the others. And then he was gone. No ash, no dust, no glow, just absence, true and complete. The next morning, the boy in her care awoke without the thread. He smiled wider, laughed louder. He drew trees, sky, his own face. And when he showed it to Theory, he asked a question he never had before. "What's my name?" She didn't know. But when she looked down at her own wrist, nothing was there. No thread, no burn, no pulse. Just skin, clean, unburdened. The choir was gone, the chamber silent. And now, even the forgotten silence had been heard. It was 11 years after the last prayer. Tourists had returned to Myanmar in cautious waves, cameras slung, eyes wide, hungry for mystery they could translate into hashtags and reels. One of them, a travel writer from Chiang Mai,
posted a question on an old folk history forum. Anyone know about a buried pagoda near Thon Pu Tau? Locals say no monks ever lived there, but my drone picked up a strange heat signature underground. Looks like a dome? The comment barely stirred attention. Just another ghost story. But one user replied. Just 3 words. Don't record it. They did, of course. The team came a month later. 4 students from a Bangkok university. Archaeology, minor in spiritual anthropology. All eager, all respectful, all unprepared. When they arrived at Xuanyin Hien, they were disappointed. It wasn't eerie, it was unusual. The pagoda was cracked, leaning, coated in moss. Its once golden spire was faded bronze. There were no footprints, no incense, no locks, just stillness. Inside, they found nothing. No relics, no inscriptions, no signs of ritual. Just the faint outline of a square trapdoor, sealed shut with stone. No handle, no hinge, no intention of ever opening. They took readings, photographed every angle. The equipment picked up no audio anomalies, no energy spikes, no magnetic pull. Only one thing stood out: the complete absence of resonance. Not quiet, not even dead air, but a null zone, as if the space around the pagoda refused to echo. Even footsteps faded too fast. Even breaths seemed swallowed. One student called it spiritually sterile. Another said it felt like being underwater without pressure. They stayed for 3 hours, then packed up, left respectfully. No one dared to camp overnight, not out of fear, but instinct. Back at the university, they ran their data. Everything normal, except one file. A 14-second clip from a sound test made inside the pagoda. Silence. Then, faintly, a breath. Then nothing. They played it dozens of times, ran spectral analysis, checked ambient noise. The file was clean. The breath didn't match any of the team, didn't come from the microphone, didn't echo in the chamber. It was just there, and then not. One student, the youngest, became obsessed. She returned alone 6 months later, asked no permission, told no one. She left behind one note: some prayers don't ask to be answered, they ask only to be ended. She was never seen again. Her tent was found undisturbed, her shoes placed neatly near the pagoda steps. Inside the pagoda, carved faintly into the stone of the altar, I didn't speak. Years passed. The pagoda remains, still leaning, still quiet. The trapdoor never opened again, because no one remembered why it was closed, and now, even the land had forgotten the sound of forgetting. But some evenings, just before the light slips below the horizon, a wind passes through the trees near the field. Not cold, not sharp, not strange, just still. A silence that knows its own shape, not haunted, not holy, just complete. And if you step close to the old stone floor and press your ear gently to it, you won't hear a chant. You won't hear children. You won't hear breath. You'll hear nothing. Perfect, finished nothing. And that's how you'll know. The prayer has ended, the echo has rested, and the chamber, at last,
has no voice left to borrow.